Welcome back, everybody. I'm Al, and I am joined by co-host and Dream Center staff member Marco, and also Doctors Louie Limas from the UCI Counseling Center, and Angela Chen, director of our very own Dream Center. Today we will be engaging in a conversation about imposter syndrome. We've all had it, and we all hate it. But what is it really? Stick around, it's gonna be a ride. Louis, you're a psychologist, so you're probably more immune to it than we are.
No, just get better at managing it. Get better at managing it.
Right, and that's why we wanted to have you on today.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure to come on here and talk about some very important issues. So my name is Louie Limas. I'm a licensed psychologist. I work as a senior staff psychologist at the UCI Counseling Center. Originally from San Diego. Did my PhD work at Indiana University, and I'm happy to be back and serving my hometown area of Southern California. So thank you for having me.
We're happy to have you.
Angela, do you want to introduce yourself too as well?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoy this podcast. I'm a fan. Let's see. So I'm Angela Chen, director of the UCI Dream Center. Yeah.
Well, we're happy to know that we have at least one fan. We currently don't have a way of checking how many people listen to the podcast accurately. So, we're kind of just like, we're telling ourselves that we are the top 5 in the nation.
Okay.
Because they can't prove otherwise. I'll start off with the first question, Louis. Just what is imposter syndrome?
Yeah. For me, in talking with the context of the student population, let's talk about it there because it can be generalized. Well, maybe I'll start with a generalization. It's feeling that the role I'm in, I'm not supposed to be in that role. And not only that, I feel like I'm not supposed to be in that role, other people will find out that I'm not supposed to be there either. And that creates a sense of anxiety. It creates a sense of isolation and a sense of lack of connection with the people who are in a similar role around me. It often makes people feel inadequate, undeserving, and the credentials that did get them to that role, maybe it was all just a mistake, luck, chance, if you will. Those are some of the things that come with kind of somebody who feels like they're in that role. And oftentimes we see it with students, which is the population I work with. And so the great practical example of that is student gets into and I mean this, the great institution of UCI through their hard work and effort, because UCI, when's the last time you heard that they would draw an application because they made a mistake? Never. And that student, though, comes to believe, and I'm sure we'll get into this, that there was a mistake, that they were not supposed to be there, that they are, in fact, an imposter wearing a disguise, and eventually they'll be found out.
That was big.
It's like every word you just said, it's like, wow, that's I'd like to ask you, is there any particular demographic of student at UCI who gets like imposter syndrome most often, like major-wise, or like, let's start, because I know there's like a lot of different ways to split up students at UCI, but I'd like to start off maybe lightly with major-wise.
Sure. Okay, so major, I don't know that I have anecdotally seen with majors, but what I will say in terms of demographics, what sticks out to me is typically students who feel like they came from low SES backgrounds, who feel like the struggle to get to where they're at, they had to like work really, really hard. And so because they feel like, especially in Orange County, right, where affluence is extremely high and where your peers oftentimes had affluence serve them well, which is no fault of them. I'm glad that that person had that level of SES to help them. But if you feel like you had to work really hard, you didn't have a lot of extra help financially, and then you come to an institution where a lot of people came from high affluence, it makes you feel like, whoa, I'm the outlier. And so I tend to see that with people who maybe come from lower SES backgrounds because they feel like they don't belong because of maybe they had to get a scholarship, or maybe because they had to get extra help along the way through mentorship. And so they feel like they were made an exception. And so what they do is they dismiss all the hard work and effort that they put in and think, well, I'm not supposed to be here because I don't have the financial backing or the family. And an extension of this is also, although they're not necessarily in the same camp, is first generation college students. That group especially feels like an imposter because they have not had an example yet of what it's like to go to college. And so if I don't have an example, so I don't have a mentor, a visualization, or somebody to talk me through what it's supposed to be like, then how is that process supposed to be normalized for me when I actually enter the college experience? So if I have no way to normalize that, no one's ever talked to me about it, I will feel isolated, and imposter syndrome, the likelihood of that happening increases. First generation, low SES. That's the short answer.
And what does SES stand for?
Oh, yeah. Socioeconomic status. So the level of income that perhaps you grew up with through all the way up until you entered undergrad. And, we can look at all the different markers on that spectrum. For some people, they came from a high SES background and they were able to have tutors literally from the day they entered elementary school, shaping their college trajectory up until they get to they get to college. To people who had no idea what college even entailed, struggled to even turn in an application. Those are kind of the factors that objectively play a role in kind of that perception of imposter syndrome and its impact on college.
Thanks. My next kind of question is going to be directed to Angela. So with all kind of like this that we've kind of heard from Louie, when was like the first time that you like knew and felt like, well, like this is an imposter syndrome, like when you felt like you didn't belong, kind of through the imposter syndrome?
Yeah. I'm sure, I don't know if you all like went there as Louie was defining it, right? Did you see yourself in that moment? Yeah. I totally like time traveled in my head, in my mind. The first time that just always screams out at me is this moment when I was in graduate school. So, I really didn't think I was qualified to go to grad school. Didn't know what it was really, and even when I started grad school, I feel like everybody around me had this insider knowledge that I was somehow not given, right? And I think in sometimes in grad school there's a lot of posturing. People always want to seem like they're the smartest or the most together, and I went in there. I would say I felt like I went in there just planning to be myself. I didn't even realize that was maybe the culture I was going into. But anyway, so I had a meeting with my one of my professors, my advisor, and I was in his office, and his office is in our ed department, and I think it's maybe the 3rd or 4th floor, and he has the corner office and lots of windows. And anyway, I was having this one-on-one meeting with him, and we were talking about something, and then I said, I'm still waiting for UCLA to tell me they made a mistake. And I admitted that to him. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm still waiting for that because I think it's a mistake. I'm like, I'm here because they haven't figured it out yet. Oh. And I'm supposed to be there working on my doctorate, and I have all these anxieties internally. And I remember he stopped the whole meeting. He was like, nope, stop. And he asked me, he's like, let's stand up, let's go, look out the window. And I, to be honest with you, I can't even remember all what he said, but basically he's similar to what Louie just said, look at this institution, look at everything that's going on, they don't make mistakes. We don't make mistakes like that in admitting you into the program, right? And so, so I really felt like after that conversation, it didn't lessen those moments because I think I felt it all the time. while, I still feel it now, but I think I go back to that moment to just raise that awareness when that little message starts like, ringing. I'm like, oh wait, is this that moment again where I'm, questioning? But, I think for me, I've had a few things that I think what Louie just said, I think really triggered like our sense of belonging, not being here. And it's not just internal, right? It's a result of a lot of external messages that we get too, right? So I think for me, when, I was turned away by a community college at one point when I was, figuring out my path into college. And I remember being told, like, we can't allow you into the institution because of your status. And I was told this in a really public setting, in the admissions office of the community college, and being told, like, yeah, you're not you're not an international student, you're not a citizen, you're not a permanent resident, we can't let you in. And that feeling seemed to have validated all those things that I've been telling myself, right? Like, is it true? But anyway, that I think there are things that the institution creates these barriers, which makes maybe first gen or students from working class backgrounds who feel like it was not designed for me. That there are these added institutional barriers. I have to say, on a note, I was years later, after I finished my doctorate and went on to do this stuff. One of my friends ended up working at this community college, and they invited me back to this particular school to talk about why they need to work with undocumented students and create resources of support. And at one point I came back and spoke to, 500 or 600 students at that community college about my experience. And so I think that was a huge, anyway, it was a really great moment, but, and it kind of circles back to that imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that personal story. It's definitely in line with, I think, a lot of people's experiences.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. I don't know if Al wants to share, like, when do you think, being a college student, especially you were not so long ago, first year, how did that feel?
I'd like to point out something Angela said, that it's like you're feeling it all the time, right? And I think it circles back to what Louie said about not only being a first gen, but like SES, right? So we met both of those conditions, right? And so like I feel like that's why it's like all the time that you're feeling like you don't belong. And so I felt like that since I'd gotten to college. I think also because I was so far away from home, and I am undeclared still. And so it's like, I don't belong anywhere, right? I don't belong in a school. I'm not from here. I'm a first gen, like, what have you been going through, right? But I feel like the moment that it felt the most, maybe that I was put in a position that I should have been proud of, but I didn't feel like I deserved it, was actually like starting to work at the Dream Center. But, and I'd like to also, Louis, maybe you can put some input on what I'm going to say next, which is it went away, like that dreadful feeling that I got at first went away pretty quick, thanks to like all the affirmation that our team would constantly give us or give me. I know Angela, she's always like making an effort to tell me like, you belong here, and we appreciate all your work. And not just Angela, Marco too, all our staff members. We all have that good vibe, that good environment going on here. I'd like to ask you, Louis, how big of a role does affirmation play? And maybe we can like move this to like, like, how do you cope with it?
So those are like two separate things, right? Well, I think we can lump them up in one, if you don't mind. So, I think affirmation is a great word to exactly the mindset of how do we curb the anxiety associated with it, because something I always tout in one shape or form is don't do it alone. And imposter syndrome is stemming from feeling like I'm alone. And so what we do oftentimes at its worst is we do things that fit the narrative of that I am an imposter. So I need to separate myself from people, because if I don't do that, people are going to find me out. So I need to shelter away. I need to sit the back of the class. I don't want to ask for help. I don't go to office hours. I don't make myself known to the professor. And all of these things start to be counterintuitive and fit that narrative. And we need to stop ourselves from doing that and recognize that actually embracing community is what will actually help us curb that feeling of imposter syndrome. The more I can be around people like-minded, like myself, perhaps who come from similar backgrounds, who come from maybe a low SES background, who come from a first-generation background, and I can see that they went maybe through similar things that I went through. Not every story is going to be the same, but maybe similar. Oh, I'm not the only one. Oh, people like myself can make it and deserve to be here, and it wasn't a mistake. In fact, they earned their way through. The more I feel less alone, then the more I feel less like an imposter. And we get that through, you said affirmations. We can do that verbally to ourselves, or we can do that socially by receiving that positive affirmation by surrounding ourselves with people who are able to support us and who have been through something similar. That's why places like the Dream Center are amazing. Oh, we can't see your sign. Wow.
Angela, feel free to say it out loud. We need people to know that this isn't pre-scripted, Angela.
Wow.
So, yes.
Wow. Louie, I want you to say that like 1,000 times more on like the mountaintop, and like with the amplifier in Aldrich Park or something. Oh my gosh. I mean that the correlation between sort of, like you said, sitting in the back of the room, or basically counting ourselves out and saying like, I'm not going to participate or engage, or it translates it's not just a mental thing. It's like behaviorally, then we sit ourselves out, and then the only way to address this is through embracing community. Oh my gosh.
Oh, no. I was just going to add, so going off of that, Marco, Louis identified like all these different places where you like leave yourself out because you feel like you don't belong, right? All these different situations. Would you like to share?
Yeah, well, the first place where I kind of just left myself out was actually when I first started college. Although it was like a great like accomplishment, I never really felt like I had belonged. So in my life, even people used to tell me like, how, like you don't belong there, like you can't even go there, like how are you gonna go there? And I think like how, just to echo what Angela said, is like these constant words that people tell you all the time. They're just in your head constantly. So every time that I heard that, I was like, I don't belong here. So I always outed myself from there. And I think every time that I pay attention to when people say like, like they're not like you, or like you're not going to understand you, I feel like that's when I out myself the most. And I think I always attribute that to luck, because it's like one of the things that I think I'm like, oh, it's just luck. I sometimes doubt my skills, that like, I got this because of skills. Like a job that I recently got, when I went, I kind of outed myself because at first I was like how did this happen? Like this is just like I just applied and I got it. But once I was in the space, I think it also had to do with like the people that were around me. Like they also didn't look like me, so I just felt like my at least I felt like my people weren't supposed to be there. So I just felt like I don't belong here. So it's just like that, where it's kind of like where I felt didn't belong. But like how Louis pointed out, places like the Dream Center, where I'm able to feel like, myself and just at home, that kind of goes away. So,
Yeah. And, I wanted to add something that based off something that Marco said that I think is interesting. It's something I talk to people about when we're talking about imposter syndrome is it's going to sound brash initially, but I'm going to say it anyway, is oftentimes we do that thing that Marco said where we overlook our skills and the thing that we earned and worked hard for to get to where we're at, to get to UCI, to get the job that Marco was talking about. And here's the thing, you can't do that because the things that you did don't care about how you feel now. They already happened. So if you got a good GPA in high school, if you volunteered, if you were a good student, just because you think you're an imposter, the facts show that you're not, because you worked hard and these things did happen. You didn't get into UCI with an F average. You didn't get into UCI because you didn't write a good essay or whatever. You didn't get into UCI because you literally failed the SATs. All of those things you did, you accomplished, and that's what was evaluated. So objectively, you did well in those things. So Marco, when Marco was talking about his job, he had skills that he put on his resume. He didn't submit an empty resume. Those things he wrote down because those are his skills. So for him to think later that, oh, I didn't deserve it, or I feel like an imposter. Sometimes it takes time. I'll work with people. Well, let's look at the things that show that's not true. The objective things that we can't attach feelings to, and let's just sit with it. You did well in this, and that's what was evaluated, and that was what determined that you were good for this position.
Al, do you have a question?
Oh no, I wanted to invite Angela into you're in a position where you see students all the time, and not only are you counseling students with advice for when they schedule a meeting with you, but you're also deciding on what we're gonna do to build the community and what programs we're gonna enact and move forward with. What are your thoughts listening to this? Is there something you're reevaluating?
Well, as I'm listening to this again, I think I'm so I'm so proud of UCI, I guess, or at least in this group and the conversation that's happening within this podcast, because we're being so intentional about addressing this, and we're not shying away from it, and we want to share our experience. But I think on a one-on-one basis, I think when I working or meeting with students, I think just being honest and sharing that vulnerability, that piece where I struggle with it as well, I think hopefully that I don't know if it's reassuring or not, because people you think maybe you don't feel are dealing with this is still dealing with it. So I don't know if that helps or it has the adverse effect. But yeah, no, I think our community having a space. So, okay, I want to say the language, naming, claiming, reclaiming, redefining, defining, all of those things, right, I think is sort of an attempt to change institutional culture, so that to see a dream center, is important in its actual resource, but it's also symbolic, right? That you can go on a website or go in our space and see your experience reflected in these spaces, right? And I think that contributes to, I think, a sense of belonging. Having really open dialogue about this, and I don't know, Louie, you can let me know if this is the difference between your role and my role. I feel that maybe you have to be more intentional in working with the students that you work with, so that they arrive at that point of feeling a sense of belonging. So there's some, they have to arrive at that in some ways. And I think in my role, I think I'm just more intentional in saying, you belong, just kind of, and saying that you absolutely belong. This is why, but I think it's hard. I think it's still hard. It's something that we have to work at all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think both are true. It just depends on the person. Literally, sometimes people they haven't got that statement. And the sense of relief that they get from somebody in positions that they value, and hearing that validation, sometimes that's the first step of what they need, is just hearing literally, you deserve to be here.
Yeah.
And that can be a game changer, because they maybe have not heard that.
Right now, kind of like giving the situation that we're all in, I feel like a lot of people might feel like the sense of not belonging. How can we help them with that? Like, what type of skills or just resources, I guess, do we have to offer that we can show them, like, hey, you do belong, even though we're apart, or we can also be close. Because how Louie was pointing out, that we attribute ourselves to being like not imposters when we have a belonging, like when we have the Dream Center. But how do we do that right now when we don't necessarily have a place of belonging? Like, yeah, we might have our home, but sometimes it's not the best situation. So
yeah, it's tough. Let's acknowledge that first. It's very tough. And I think a lot of things that people are realizing is that the virtual outlet to do that, it becomes cumbersome and becomes tiring. We are using this virtual outlet for all our interactions, whether it be school, work, exercise, whatever. And so it becomes exhausting. So I don't take it lightly, that question. And because I know that the easy response is like, reach out to your friends and do some more video calls. Well, it gets exhausting doing that. And I think, communication can happen in different ways. We can be more interactive with it, whether it be playing games with each other, whether it be texting or doing the video call. I still think that engaging in that social communication is what's very, very much important. The other thing that I always try to press as much, if you've ever worked with me, it's probably come up, is practicing self-compassion and practicing self-gratitude. We live in a world all too often where we're always pushing on to the next thing. And if we are always in that mentality of like, what's next? What's the next task I have to do? What's the next assignment I have to do? Then it might increase imposter syndrome, because it might just make us feel like we're always behind and everyone else has got it together except us. Well, take a moment, take a breath, and let's practice some gratitude. What are some things that have worked out for you in the past 2 weeks? What are some things that you can acknowledge and give yourself a little self-compassion? If I can acknowledge my efforts and my successes that I have dictated, that have been influenced by me, then maybe I can be a little bit more compassionate towards myself, and maybe I don't feel as much as an imposter because I'm acknowledging my success. And you can do that on your own.
Louie, can you share an example that, like, have you had to practice that?
Oh, yes. Yes. I definitely do that. So I just go, there's different ways to practice self-compassion and gratitude. For me, it's this, I take the direct approach, which is I use the sentence stem, I am grateful for, and I insert something. Now, some people are going to struggle with that because they're going to start broad. They're going to say, I'm grateful for friends. I'm grateful for life. And I think what helps is when you can add specificity and emotions to it. So for me, it would be like, I'm grateful that the sun is out today because yesterday it wasn't, and I could get some vitamin D on my skin, and it made me feel a little bit happier because I was feeling down. Today I'm grateful because my wife is healthy and strong, and and it makes me feel happy that she feels that way. And I'm grateful that one that I've said recently is I'm grateful that I have my job still, because a lot of people don't have their job, and I don't want to take that for granted. I'm grateful that, and I work hard at my job to make sure that I do a good job in a time of uncertainty. And when I acknowledge those things, it takes me out of whatever mindset I may have been in that hyper focuses on the things that I still need to do or accomplish or I'm lackluster in, and it makes me view things a little bit more optimistically. So now if you're feeling an imposter syndrome, challenge yourself to do that, and I think you'll find that it'll go away just a little bit. It's not going to be the solution end all, but it might help.
I want to add a different imposters issue that I think I'm constantly working through and kind of learning. So I suppose, how do I say this? my lived experience may be different than my peers or the environment that I'm in. And because of that experience, I think it highlights some of the areas that feel like they don't accommodate my experience. And I think with that, you can be, I think with anyone who is trying to be innovative, creative, is a change agent, I think will also feel a sense of not belonging. Does that, you know? So, you know, actually the vision for a dream center, for example, I mean, you know, these considerations happened over a decade ago, right? And so for, you know, having those conversations, for example, in a higher ed context for me, often made me feel like an imposter, or I felt like I was speaking a completely different language than maybe some of the people around me. Or, you know, I think there were times where I'm just like, am I out of my mind? Is my reality, you know, just like somewhere else? And I think that, and I think, you know, I'm thinking about Marco and Al and people on our team, right, who's always pushing for new things and changes and trying to create space that is more reflective or needed for our community. And sometimes that may make you feel like you're out of place. But, you know, but sometimes it's just because your ideas are several steps ahead of where maybe the entire community or system is going, you know? And so, I don't know, it took a while, but, and I think initially I internalized that a lot. I thought, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep thinking or feeling this way? And it took a long time to sort of arrive at this point where I'm like, oh, it's not me. It was because I'm working in an environment that was resistant to some of those changes and ideas. Yeah,
absolutely.
But the thing is, that's why I think everyone in our team is so incredibly valuable, because you are, because of your experience, because you're living this, you can bring us to that place. And I think those moments where you feel like out of place, and you hone in on that and identify the reasons why you feel out of place as something, you know, environmental and not from within yourself. I think that's when we can create more opportunities for belonging. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Looking ahead of what we can add, and you feel like you're out of place. And I completely felt like that when I was working on the STEM workshop, because at the Dream Center, we offer a lot of programs and a lot of support, but it felt to me that STEM wise, it was like a whole different area that we hadn't really attacked yet, right? And going for that, I kind of felt like, well, am I just doing this for myself? Am I just trying to like benefit from this, or is this something that the Dream Center really like needs? And I guess like that, I kind of felt like I wasn't playing, like I didn't belong in the team, like a little bit.
But I completely support you. I think that's exactly, you know?
And you're a great, the whole team was.
But I can see what you mean. You were taking our team in a new direction. And in that sense, it felt uncertain, or maybe now you're testing that belonging. But I think there are pros and cons to honing in on that feeling sometimes, because that feeling of not belonging or imposter syndrome there may be things that we just need to address and change, you know. But a lot of this also is can be internal dialogue, and I think that's really intense. During a conversation we had yesterday, our speaker said we think 80,000 negative thoughts or something like that about ourselves every day. Our minds are just constantly going. We have all these thousands of thoughts every day, and like 90% or something like that are tend to be self-critical. So I think is that true, Louie? Am I just making up numbers? It could be.
I don't know the numbers, but it sounds true. I just think of the average mentality of a student or the average mentality of a person within American culture, if you will, or Western culture, and it makes sense with kind of what we see in media. So I'm with you.
Louis, I had another question. What if we don't do any of that self-compassion and we become consumed by it? When do we need to look for help? Can imposter syndrome reach the point where it's like you need to see like some help?
Yes. The answer is yes. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is, what are your values in life? What are the things that you want to accomplish? And I'll say that again, and emphasizing that what are your values, not what, and if that, and I'll, to be culturally sensitive, what are your values? And that could be family values. It can be a mix of family and individualistic values. So holistically, what are your values? What do you want to accomplish? Okay. And we can even be even more specific, like on a day-to-day basis. We can think about like every quarter, what are your values? 6 months, what are your values? But even a weekly, daily basis, what are your values? What are your values? What do you want to do? What do you want to accomplish? To me, and there's a lot of gray area here, or there could potentially be, but to me, at the basis of it all, if you are not living your life in accordance with your values and doing the things that you want to accomplish in your day-to-day life because imposter syndrome is holding you back, that is a time when you need to seek additional support, because you're living a life that's not authentic to you. The moment we start to live a life that's not authentic, then we start to devalue ourselves. The world is already doing that for us. There's already enough pressures as it is. But the moment you start to do that yourself and not living your life in an authentic way, true to your values, then you might need additional support. And I think really at the end of the day, that's what matters the most. So what I mean by that also, so then the flip side of that is, it's okay. The flip side of that is what it does is it normalizes emotions. It's okay to feel like an imposter sometimes. It's okay to feel sad, frustrated, anxious, left out. These are all human experiences. But if you can experience those things and still live your life, then it's not a problem. You're just experiencing the normal emotions that come with life. Because emotions should not be stigmatized or viewed as this or that. Like I experience it, therefore there's something wrong with me. No, there's a spectrum to anything. Only when it gets to a point in your life where those things are holding you back and imposter syndrome is holding you back from doing those things that are important to you, then I would say is important. It would be a good time to step in and see if you can find some additional support. And if that's a professional, then by all means.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think that's very important for our listeners to hear. I don't know if Marco wants to add anything to this. It's like sometimes you get really caught up. You're like, I don't need the help, Mm-hmm. Like how much of a role does like minimizing your problems play with people like not wanting to look for help?
Right. Well, and I wanted to add another thing to that, just to add more specificity, because I realized as I heard myself say it, maybe it was a little abstract. When I say values, I mean like it's valuable to me to call a friend and go on a coffee date maybe once or twice a week. It's valuable to me to go to class on time and turn in my assignments. It's valuable to me to go to the gym. It's valuable to me to do my chores around the house. And if suddenly you find yourself you're not doing any of those things and you're just laying in bed all day, that's probably a good time.
Okay.
So a more practical, like when I was referring to values, that's what I meant.
Oh, thank you.
I think that does play a big part, as Louie was mentioning. I think I did suffer that my first year, but I never really looked for help because I just, to me, like the stigma that also has to do with my culture, being Latino, is that, you don't need help, you got to figure out yourself. But eventually, now in my third year, once I started learning more and just saying that enough is enough, I was able to ask for help. So I think it also plays a big role in like your culture, like how do they view things like imposter syndrome, because I think even our parents like feel it, but they just deal it by themselves and they don't really look for help. So yeah, I just want to add that like we all should become kind of well self-aware of like when's the time to ask for help, and like let every other barrier, like culture and all that aside, to kind of seek for help and help yourself, because ultimately I feel like it's you're the only one that has yourself.
Marco, I think that was talking about culture, background, and generational issues too. I really resonate with that, because I think, I think about my parents, or my uncles and aunts and grandparents that are immigrants here. I think to some extent, they can still largely live their day-to-day is still within sort of our cultural, ethnic, and racial communities. So and not to say there's no imposter syndrome there or this manifest, but I think as the children of immigrants, or being first gen students and first gen immigrants, like we are constantly trying to find belonging in multiple spaces, because we have to go out into the world and take on perhaps we may have to do like what Louie was saying, exercise or try to put in practice our purpose and meaning in multiple spaces that are familiar and unfamiliar. I think that, sorry, it took so long to get to that point. But like when I forgot who was looking into this, but there's a researcher who looks at the hyphen, right? The like Asian American or whatever, blank dash American. It's like we exist in that hyphen sometimes because we're constantly, right, trying to figure it out. And I, for me, I'm ethnically Chinese, nationally Taiwanese, and then there's like we're Hans, we're we have all. I mean, my own background, I feel like has all these different layers. And I remember having a conversation at home, and I'm like, oh, I'm like, it's kind of cool, I feel like, maybe I can relate to the Chinese community, the Taiwanese community, the U.S. community. And I specifically remember my uncle saying, he's like, yeah, the truth is, like, you don't belong in any of these communities because none of those communities will claim you. And I was like, dang, that hurts, I'm all feeling optimistic over here, right? And then so we're constantly in between and finding that. And I think that poses another layer. So like revisiting that, are we aligning ourselves with our purpose, our mission, our goals, and perhaps having to understand that in multiple contexts.
I'd like to add, now that we're all home because of COVID, it seems like all this is being amplified 200-fold. You're kind of like your parents are living like a different life, right, than we are, and they're like their struggles and their circumstances are different, and like their worries are different. It's like you're in your room all day doing your homework, and then like they're actually out there working, right? And then sometimes it's hard, like when you try to compare yourself to like what they're actually getting done and what you're getting done. It's like I feel like that can make imposter syndrome worse.
Yeah, the generational comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tricky. It's tricky. Depending on cultural background, I would say that, our own. I was born in America, but my mom immigrated here, and and she tells me about her own kind of experience of that, and in a way, she's going through that assimilation imposter syndrome of feeling like I'm not American enough, or I don't speak English well enough in order to fit in to society. So she found it in her way to kind of find peace within that, and resolution was to literally work hard, was to literally put the time and effort and provide for myself. And so I think oftentimes, and this is based on anecdotal experiences, my own experiences, that family communicates us in a way of wanting it to be from a place of love and wanting us to not have to go through some similar struggles that they had to go through with their own acculturation process. Not to say that they didn't go through a version of imposter syndrome that we might be going through now, but it was just a different form, and they resolved it in a different way, which is to work hard to be a contributing member of society. And so I think that because there's that generational difference in how we appraised the imposter syndrome differently, it seems like, as the person currently, like the student now, as you were saying, Al, it feels like, oh, why am I going through this when my parents had much worse things to go through? Well, the reality is, I would argue that in a lot of situations, they went through the same feelings, just the things that we did and were going through practically were different. Acculturation versus education, right? And in some cases, students, being first generation or immigrants themselves, are going through both. But the way you are trying to resolve that is in this day and age, because of the hard work of our parents, is through education. And so I think when we gain perspective that it's not that I'm wasting my time, or it's not because my parents are doing so much more than me, but it's just different, then I think we can appreciate the experiences of both generations better and come back to self-compassion better. That my parents did it the way they had to do with it, and I'm dealing with how I have to do it now. There might be some misunderstanding, but if I can just appreciate both experiences, and both experiences can be true, then maybe I don't make myself feel bad about it. Maybe.
That's good.
But yeah, Angela said, "Wow, yeah." I think that's going to be very helpful for a lot of our students, because not only are we first gen low SES, like you said, but we're also dealing with different generations, right?
Different generations. But each generation found their own way of resolving it. But just because they found their own way, it shouldn't be a judgment of how the new generation is dealing with it on their own.
Yeah.
But I think it's easy for us to be essentially more privileged because of the hard work of our parents, and to feel like, what am I complaining about? But it's a dangerous road to comparisons, because then if we constantly compare, then we'll never be validated.
Louie, so many things you said today, I want them to become like t-shirts or things I put up
in monetize.
or no, just like constant reminders, if we constantly compare, we'll never be validated. That's huge. That's such that is such a powerful thought. Because if we can't, I always talk about, I do say, look, we can't compare ourselves to each other, because you can't control for all the variables. There's 1,000 bazillion variables. You just can't. But we'll never be validated. Oh my gosh, that's so powerful.
Yeah, somebody's always got it worse than me. Well, then we just keep going with that, and it's endless. Well, somebody's dealing with this. Well, then that person can't be valid because somebody else has got it worse, and then that person has something else worse. So then only that one person, apparently at the very bottom of the totem pole, gets to be. Excuse me, that was a bad reference. Or the bad end of the line gets validated, right? And we'll never find that person, because someone's always has it worse. Your issues are valuable. Your things you're going through are important. And so validate yourself and then find peace within that.
Thank you.
I guess that's a wrap. And Louie, I know maybe you'll see an uptick in new people asking for your service.
Well, hey, what I always say is I'm there. So yes. Whether you come or not, I'm still there. So please come.
Yeah. And we appreciate you for that. People are there are people fighting at the front lines of this epidemic at the moment, but I personally believe that psychologists are going to be the new first responders once we start dealing with the repercussions of this. So, I think we all really appreciate what you do. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the DC host and the Dream Center. How can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can call the UCI Counseling Center. We are still open in all caps. We are still open. And so the phone number is 949-824-6457. You can call during normal business hours. Someone will pick up. It won't be an automated message. And you can just say, like, I'm interested in services, and you'll be scheduled for your first intake. All services are free, regardless of what insurance you have, whether you have SHIP or not. It doesn't matter. You've already paid for it. So use the service. Call, make your first appointment. And right now we are not terribly busy. So you can get your first appointment ideally within a week, week and a half. Please schedule. No problem is too small, from test anxiety to an argument with my roommate to depression. We treat it all. So come on in. Well, we treat most things, I should say. So come on in.
Thank you. Al, want to wrap it up?
This has been Unscripted Journeys.